Psychology has spent more than a century trying to answer one question: what shapes the way a human being thinks, feels, and behaves? And while that question has no single answer, researchers have identified certain concepts that appear again and again at the center of mental and emotional well-being. Not obscure clinical terms, not personality types or diagnostic categories, but ideas that describe something real about the experience of being inside a human mind. This video introduces 10 of those concepts, not as a checklist, not as a self-help prescription, but as a map, because understanding the territory is the first step toward navigating it with more skill. The first concept is the negativity bias. Your brain does not treat all experiences equally. Negative events, threats, losses, and criticisms are processed more deeply, remembered more vividly, and influence your thinking more powerfully than positive events of the same size. This is not a design flaw. Psychologists Roy Baumeister and John Tierney, drawing on decades of research, describe how the brain evolved in environments where missing a threat was far more costly than missing an opportunity. A missed berry means hunger. A missed predator means death. So the brain learned to weight the bad more heavily than the good. The problem is that your brain is now running this ancient software in a modern world where most threats are social rather than physical. A critical comment lands harder than 10 compliments. One difficult conversation overshadows a good week. You replay what went wrong far more readily than what went right. Knowing this does not make the bias disappear, but it changes your relationship to it. When your mind fixates on what is bad, you can recognize that this is your brain doing its job, not an accurate report on reality. The second concept is rumination. Rumination is the mental habit of replaying distressing thoughts, memories, or problems in a repetitive loop without reaching resolution. Psychologist Susan Nolan Hoeksema, who spent decades studying this pattern, found that ruminators do not solve problems more effectively. They feel worse, stay stuck longer, and are significantly more vulnerable to depression and anxiety. The mind mistakes repetition for progress. It believes that if it turns a problem over enough times, it will eventually find the exit. But rumination is not thinking, it is the simulation of thinking. The loop returns to the same point because it was never designed to arrive anywhere. Interrupting rumination requires deliberate redirection, physical movement, a change in environment, focused attention on something external, or structured problem-solving with a defined endpoint. The goal is not to avoid difficult thoughts, it is to notice when thinking has stopped being useful and to choose differently. The third concept is cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the discomfort that arises when your beliefs, values, or self-image conflict with your behavior or with new information. Psychologist Leon Festinger, who developed the theory in the 1950s, observed that the mind does not simply tolerate contradiction, it works urgently to resolve it. And the most common resolution is not to change your behavior, but to change your belief. You convince yourself that the behavior was justified, that the evidence is wrong, or that the contradiction does not really exist. Cognitive dissonance is behind much of the rationalization that passes for reasoning. It explains why intelligent people defend positions long after the evidence has shifted, why people stay in situations they know are harmful, and why receiving accurate feedback can feel like an attack. Recognizing dissonance when it appears, that specific internal friction when reality and self-image collide, is one of the most honest things a person can do. It is the moment where real change becomes possible. The fourth concept is locus of control. Psychologist Julian Rotter introduced this concept in the 1950s to describe where a person believes the control over their life resides. An internal locus of control means believing that your choices, efforts, and responses significantly shape your outcomes. An external locus of control means believing that outcomes are primarily determined by luck, other people, circumstances, or forces beyond your influence. Neither position is entirely accurate. Life contains both genuine agency and genuine constraint, but research consistently shows that people with a stronger internal locus of control tend to experience better mental health, greater resilience, and more effective coping across a wide range of circumstances. Not because they control more, but because they focus their energy on what they can actually influence rather than on what they cannot. The question worth sitting with is not whether you have control over everything, it is whether you are using the agency you do have. The fifth concept is attachment styles. In the 1960s and 1970s, psychologist John Bowley and later Mary Ainsworth established that the patterns of connection formed between a child and their earliest caregivers create internal templates that shape how a person relates to others throughout their life. These templates, known as attachment styles, are not fixed destinies, but they are deeply ingrained. They show up in how you handle closeness and distance, how you respond when someone is unavailable or uncertain, how much reassurance you need, and how readily you trust. Secure attachment tends to produce relationships where both closeness and independence feel manageable. Anxious attachment tends to produce hypervigilance to signs of rejection. Avoidant attachment tends to produce discomfort with emotional dependence. Understanding your attachment patterns does not excuse behavior or guarantee change, but it offers something important. It connects present reactions to past learning, which makes those reactions less bewildering and more workable. The sixth concept is self-efficacy. Psychologist Albert Bandura distinguished self-efficacy from self-esteem in a distinction that matters enormously. Self-esteem is your general sense of worth. Self-efficacy is your belief in your capacity to perform specific tasks and navigate specific challenges. A person can have high self-esteem and low self-efficacy in a particular domain. A person can have low self-esteem overall and still hold genuine confidence in their ability to handle a specific kind of difficulty. Bandura found that self-efficacy is built primarily through mastery experiences, through actually doing difficult things and surviving them, not through being told you are capable, not through affirmations, through experience that accumulates into evidence. This is why avoidance is so psychologically costly. Every time you avoid something difficult, you remove an opportunity to build the evidence base your mind needs to believe it can cope. The belief follows the action, not the other way around. The seventh concept is emotional regulation. Emotional regulation is not the suppression of emotion. It is the capacity to experience emotion without being entirely governed by it. Psychologists James Gross and Ross Thompson have identified that there is a meaningful difference between feeling an emotion and acting from it automatically, and that this gap, small as it can sometimes be, is where much of mental and emotional health lives. Emotional regulation includes recognizing what you are feeling and naming it accurately, which research by Matthew Lieberman and colleagues suggests physically reduces emotional intensity. It includes understanding what triggered the feeling, tolerating the discomfort of strong emotion without immediately acting to end it, and choosing responses rather than simply reacting. This is not about achieving emotional neutrality. Strong feelings are not problems to be eliminated. They are information. The skill lies in learning to read that information without letting it drive every decision. The eighth concept is cognitive reframing. Cognitive reframing is the practice of examining the interpretation you have placed on an event and asking whether a different interpretation is also accurate or more accurate. This is not positive thinking. Positive thinking asks you to replace a negative thought with a positive one regardless of evidence. Cognitive reframing, as developed within cognitive behavioral therapy by Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, asks a more honest question. Is this interpretation the only one available or the most accurate one?
The mind tends to arrive at interpretations quickly and treat them as facts. A slow reply becomes a sign of rejection. A mistake becomes evidence of fundamental inadequacy. A setback becomes proof that the goal was never achievable. Reframing does not demand optimism, it demands scrutiny. It asks, what else could this mean? What would I say to someone I cared about who was thinking this? What do I actually know as opposed to what am I assuming? The ninth concept is psychological safety. Psychologist Amy Edmondson, researching team performance at Harvard, found that the single strongest predictor of a high-performing team was not talent, resources, or strategy. It was psychological safety, the shared belief that it is safe to speak up, make mistakes, ask questions, and take interpersonal risks without being punished or humiliated. Her research has since been applied far beyond workplaces. Psychological safety matters in any relationship where vulnerability is required for growth, which is most relationships of any significance. The absence of psychological safety does not always announce itself loudly. It shows up as the habit of editing yourself before you speak, the chronic exhaustion of monitoring how you are perceived, the fear of being exposed as less capable or less certain than you have presented yourself to be. When psychological safety exists in a relationship, a team, a therapeutic space, or even within your own internal self-talk, something loosens. People take more risks, admit more uncertainty, and learn more effectively. The 10th concept is self-compassion. Psychologist Kristin Neff has defined self-compassion through 3 components: self-kindness in moments of failure or difficulty rather than harsh self-criticism; common humanity, the recognition that suffering and imperfection are universal experiences rather than personal failures; and mindfulness, the capacity to hold painful thoughts and feelings with balanced awareness rather than suppression or over-identification. Research consistently shows that self-compassion is associated with greater emotional resilience, lower anxiety and depression, and more sustained motivation, not less, as many people fear. The concern that treating yourself with compassion will make you complacent is understandable, but it is not supported by the evidence. Harsh self-criticism tends to trigger the threat response system, narrowing thinking and increasing avoidance. Self-compassion tends to trigger the caregiving system, which is associated with safety, openness, and the willingness to try again. 10 concepts, not a personality test, not a diagnostic framework, not a prescription for who you should become. What they share is this: each one describes something that is already happening inside you. The negativity bias is already shaping which experiences you remember. Your attachment patterns are already influencing how you navigate closeness. Your locus of control is already directing where you focus your energy. Your self-efficacy beliefs are already determining which challenges you approach and which you quietly avoid. Understanding these concepts does not give you a new mind, it gives you a clearer view of the one you already have. And that clarity, the ability to see your own patterns with a little more honesty and a little less judgment, is not the end of the work, it is the beginning of it. There is a version of you that handles difficulty without collapsing under it. The map has always existed. Now you have a few more ways to read it.